Hello, welcome to another episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I'm your host, Amanda, and my lovely co-host is...
Hello, I'm Megan.
Hey. So this is our weekly book club episode, and today we are finishing up The Danish Way of Raising Teens, what the happiest people in the world know about raising confident, healthy teenagers with character. Yeah. So we're glad you're joining us to discuss these last few chapters. If you read along, awesome. We hope you'll share your thoughts or comments with us, either by leaving a comment somewhere, really pretty much anywhere, or send us a message. And if you're just listening along with us, that's equally as awesome. And we would also love to know what your big takeaways are from this book and our discussion.
Yeah, do tell. Mine has been that the Danish welfare state is why they're happy. I mean, I think we hit on it a few weeks ago and I was like, that make me pretty happy. So, I mean, the book overall has been okay, but that's been my big one. Before we dive into this book, Amanda mentioned that this is our final week on this book. And next week, we're starting a new book written by Blake Bowles called Better Than College. You absolutely do not have to read along with us to join the book club. You can come and tune in and listen and go about your day. If you like to read with us and read along, we'll leave a link to the book in our show notes and put it on our social media, along with a breakdown of weekly reading. Oh, I'm bad about doing that sometimes. Okay, must do that. With a weekly breakdown of reading on our social channels so that you can join us and read along if you'd like to. So today we are finishing the book. We've got chapters 9 and 10, plus the epilogue. It has come up off and on throughout the book about the Danish alcohol culture, and one of our community members actually brought that up when we said we were going to be reading this book, and she was like, she's like, we have a huge drinking problem among our teenagers in Denmark, and so we're tackling it head on in today's reading. So I'm eager to hear what you think about it today. Our chapter title is Freedom with Responsibility, Danish Alcohol Culture. What do you think, Amanda?
Well, I gotta say, it didn't seem like there was much talk of responsibility around alcohol.
Even for herself, when she was telling us stories about stupid things she did while she was drunk as a teenager. And I was like,
we'll get there. Yeah. So my first comment was like, I just did more of a summary, right? The first half of, not even the first half, the first several pages are a discussion of how much Danish people drink. She is kind of outlining the way that it starts at a young age, how prevalent it is in their culture, how it started with the Vikings. And then she also gives statistics on alcoholism and how much it's diagnosed and different things like that. I went and did some of my own research on that. Having lived in Europe, I was really surprised. So in general, I have thoughts, right? In general, I struggled with this whole section. But beyond that, I do think that Americans are really quite prudish when it comes to alcohol use and drinking. And as with a lot of things, this whole book kind of illustrates that idea. When you tell people they can't do it, when they do it, they do it in excess. And I do think that we have a real problem in the United States with that, right? The binge drinking culture and alcoholism and all of those kinds of things, right? It's not taught, you're not taught to do it responsibly and carefully at a younger age. And it's not really embraced. You know, I'm always shocked when I go home to the Midwest and I think like, oh, I'd like to have a glass of wine or a cocktail or a beer with my meal. You don't really do that unless you're at really nice places. Like the vast majority of places that you would roll out with like your extended family or with your kids, like you don't get a drink with your meal. Like you probably have a problem if you're drinking with your meal but you should go home and drink like a 6-pack. Like I don't,
right.
Like there's
closet
right
drinking.
There's exactly, you know, like, so there are definitely issues. And having lived in Europe, right, we saw a lot more drinking, casual drinking, social drinking, drinks with meals and that kind of stuff, which is totally fine. We happen to live on a pedestrian street in Brussels, and we randomly lived right up above pub/bar that was pretty well known and popular with expats. We were in a really shishy area, and it was not uncommon for them to open at like 10 or 10:30 in the morning, and for men to be outside drinking at 10 or 10:30 in the morning right underneath our window. And, you know, like Uh, that's probably not really ideal either. And when I spoke with Europeans, and we made a lot of European friends, there was a lot of talk about the fact that there's probably a lot more alcoholism in Europe than is reported or diagnosed, because it is so prevalent and okay to drink several drinks a day and to start early and have a couple of drinks with every meal. And there are so many people that need that. And that is the definition of alcoholism, right? If you need to have a drink every day, that is a problem. But that is it's so interwoven in so much of the culture that it's not diagnosed. Whereas in the US, it is probably a little overdiagnosed. That's one of those things, or maybe not necessarily overdiagnosed. I don't know if that's the right term, but it's much more likely to be diagnosed because we have such a puritanical culture around alcohol and all of those things, right? So I think that we're not really comparing apples to apples on this. And so it makes the whole thing a little bit of a difficult conversation to like really dig into.
Mm-hmm. I can completely see that. I was thinking too, even just culturally, our work-life balance is much different than it is in Europe. And so in the US also, you have things like we're a much more litigious society. In companies in the US, HR is consistently being afraid of being sued and stuff like that, right? So in Europe, it's much more common. You go out to lunch with coworkers, have a couple of drinks, go back to the office, right? That our society, that would not work in American offices and things like that. We also don't have mass transit like they have in Europe, so we'd have more driving issues, right? So it's just such a different culture to try to apples to apples it, like you said, is really, really difficult.
Yeah. I worked a long time ago, and I won't mention the place because I don't want you going ham on them. Not you specifically, but some random person listening and deciding to get on their high horse. But I worked at a research facility, and it was very prestigious place. I was a fundraiser there. I wasn't a researcher, but we had Europeans who would get internships, or they would get entry-level research positions, and they would come and or their fellowships, things like that. And it was not uncommon for us to go out and have drinks at lunch, right? We would go out, we would have lunch, and we had a rule. There was a written rule that you could have 2 drinks and come back to work, but you couldn't have more than 2 drinks. And people would absolutely lose their minds when people would find out that I worked at a place that allowed this. Like, how can they allow people back in the lab if they've had any alcohol? And like, well, I mean, it's not like they're going outside the lab and like taking a couple shots and then like walking back in, like waiting for it to hit them, like you went out to lunch, you had a drink with your meal, kind of thing. Like it wasn't anything crazy. And then on Fridays, it was, Fridays, there was a lot more alcohol involved, and the day stopped like at 3. If you went to the event at 3, oh man, there was someone who made some really good sangria, and if you drank that, you were not allowed back in the lab after that, right? But you definitely there's definitely differences, and there are pockets of it, and even within the United States, right, different cultures and different things with that. Yeah.
So I will freely admit that my notes are scant this week. We mentioned in the main episode this week that I am moving. I'm literally podcasting from a dog bed in the closet because the truck is being loaded tomorrow. So I read the book, but I kind of had more overall arching notes. So I hope when I make a couple of comments, I don't step on your individualized notes that are much more detailed and well thought out than mine were. But I thought first I thought it was really interesting that she references the fact that they're, generally speaking, a fairly uptight culture, or a reserved culture is probably a better way of putting it. And that part of their relationship with alcohol means that they can let loose and have a little bit more fun if they have a couple of drinks. So I thought that was pretty interesting observation, and bold to admit maybe in a book like this, and to kind of put that out there. But other than that, I thought it was really interesting when I was reading the pages for this week. It was like, well, it's not great. We have these issues. And then she'd be like, but other places have issues too, or it's worse other places, or it's not as bad as it could be, right? And so it was like she'd put it out there and she'd kind of say it's not that bad, but then give us a whole bunch of reasons why. It was like deflecting almost, right? Like, oh, but it's worse over there, or it could be different. Yeah. So I thought that was a pretty interesting kind of overall takeaway for me from this section.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see we both have comments about marijuana. I just jotted down that it seems like sometimes she is okay with alcohol use, but then condemns cannabis for basically the
She's
same concepts.
yeah, she's very yeah. So I mean, I had a lot
Your,
of thoughts on that.
yeah, your notes
Did
are way more robust. Let's look what you got.
um well, I was just trying to look and see if I had anything. You said you have a quote on 189, and I was just trying to look and see if I had anything on that page or not. I was
Yeah,
curious if we flagged the same thing.
let me see. I just have a thing here where it talks about, so
Oh, we do. I flagged it too. I just didn't write it down. Yeah. So she
yeah.
says, you give them your insecurity and fear to carry on their shoulders, which is the start of a relationship in free fall as your worries become their burden.
And she's talking about sending her kids out to parties where she knows they're going to be drinking and giving them parameters or guidelines or mentorship, for lack of a better word. And so basically saying that because, so if you make an agreement with your teenagers, like 2 drinks only, that's it, that they are not responsible enough to stick to that. And so then that's going to make them feel bad. And then they'll know that you're upset or stressed or worried because they haven't held up their end of the bargain. And that puts too much of a worrisome burden on them. And I was kind of like, I don't know about that. I mean, so what's the alternative? Is just not telling them not to just drink whatever you want. I don't know.
I don't know, because earlier she advocated a 4-drink limit, like a 4-drink max and a 10 p.m. curfew in one of the earlier chapters that like really stuck out of my head. So I have to say, I struggled with this chapter. It felt like she was contradicting a lot of what she had said earlier in the book. And so that feeds into this bigger discussion. So on page 195, actually maybe the page before that, we start talking about drugs, right? And so she's talked about alcohol and the stats around alcohol. On page 195, I pulled out this quote. She says, in the US, marijuana is fully legal in several states. For the record, I live in a state where it's legal. It is perfectly normal to see teens walking around with a joint in their mouth. I gotta say, I've never seen that. And I live right next to 2 high schools, one that's not a great high school and another one that's a good high school, and next to a city college. And actually I live right by 3 high schools. Actually, there are 3 high schools all within like a 3-block radius. That, but in any event, I've never seen a kid walking around with a joint in their mouth. I know when I was younger, it was really cool to roll your own cigarettes, and it wasn't joints, it was cigarettes. But this whole, like you got the papers and you had the, so I mean, like maybe that's what she saw. I don't know. And I even asked my husband, I'm like, maybe I'm out of touch, because he likes to pay more attention to that, and he's a little bit more of a negative Nelly. I'm like, maybe I'm silver lining it. We've talked about I have that problem, and he was like, no, like I see people our age and maybe a little younger just walking around real proud with their joint, but like I don't think you don't even see teenagers like smoking these days, right? Like okay, so there was that. And then she goes on to say, or smell the characteristic odor in the streets first thing in the morning and all day long. Now I will say we smell it all the time, and like there'll be times I'm in the car and I'm like, who is driving and smoking? Like clearly it's someone around us, because I can't get out of the fog of smoke, of like marijuana smoke, and we have this constant problem in our condo building, right? Like my husband cooks most of the dinners during the week. We have this trade-off kind of system. And when he cooks, he likes to open the patio, the back balcony door to air the place out. And there's someone that lives on the same courtyard as us who does their nightly smoke right around 6:30 every night. And so it's like that thing of, do we get the door open in time? And then Winston is like, oh my God, it smells awful, and then he runs over to shut the door, because I'm like, there are so many, it's legal. There are so many options that do not smell that bad now. Like there's no need for that, like so you do smell it quite a lot, but you don't, living in a state where it's legal, you don't see people just walking around with joints hanging out of their mouth or any other a marijuana vape pen or whatever. Like it's not like that. Okay.
The only time I ever saw somebody doing that, ironically, was in a state where it wasn't legal and where there was actually a large police presence. So if you have never been in Asheville, North Carolina, which has just been hit so hard by Hurricane Helene, there's a drum circle that takes place on Friday nights during the warmer months. And it is the most amazing. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful if you enjoy just letting loose and going and dancing and having fun and all kinds of stuff. And there's, people that perform with hula hoops and all kinds of wacky stuff. It's out there. It's a really fun night. If we're ever anywhere in the vicinity, we make sure we get there on a Friday. And it was hilarious because there was some guy who was just dancing at the drum circle and having a good time, and he had a joy. And the police officer just went over to him and said, "Dude, could you put it away, please?" Like, that was it, And I was like, and it's not even legal there. That's like the one and only time I ever saw. And he just was like, "I'm at the drum circle, dude. Everybody here is high." Like, it's like, we're good. But the cop was just like, "Please don't. Could you not? Could you be a little less obvious, please?"
That's so obvious. Exactly. So yeah, there was that. And then shortly after, she's got another quote that says, "In Denmark, according to the Danish Medicines Agency, it is legal to buy and possess marijuana, parentheses CBD, as a consumer, but illegal to sell it as a retailer. You can therefore legally get medical cannabis in Denmark if your doctor has prescribed it and gets the products delivered to a pharmacy. Otherwise, it is illegal." And I'm just like, this entire sentence just proves to me that this lady has no idea what the fuck she's talking about. Like, first off, CBD has no hallucinogenic, mind altering, like it doesn't have any of that, right? THC is what does that. And CBD does not have any THC. Like, you can carry CBD around on your person. You can take it through the airport. The drug dogs are never going to find it. They're never going to know, like, and it is still illegal in more conservative places. Like, I personally use CBD. I have for a long time to control nerve pain. I have this, it's called trigeminal neuralgia and Frey's syndrome, and it's fairly well controlled with CBD. I travel with CBD a lot. If I'm going through the Middle East, I don't take my CBD because it's just not worth it, right? Like, it's clearly says on the packaging, no THC, no this, no that. There are countries that like are just still behind the times, right? Women aren't allowed to uncover their heads. I don't really trust them to be like, "Oh, you're a woman and you have CBD. It's okay." Like, you roll the dice and sometimes you don't. But in Europe, I mean, come on. Like,
I mean, they make CBD for kids. Like, it's clearly not the same thing.
No, you can, and you can buy it. You can buy CBD creams and lotions for, like next to the BioFreeze. Like, come on, like, this is not, like, she's completely conflating things. And I'm like so unimpressed with this one specific section. I was just really like, she's got some personal hangups.
Yeah, it comes across to me when I was reading it, like, she has come to terms with alcohol, even though she admits that it's kind of an issue in Denmark for the teens. But even though the same consequences might exist for somebody who has a reliance on marijuana in some way, although the addictive nature of marijuana is not the same as something like heroin or, a hard drug like that. So she's okay with the alcohol, but for some reason marijuana, like, completely no, like, not allowed, not okay. And I'm like, aren't you kind of talking out both sides of your mouth? Because she talks about some of the challenges that could come from teens abusing alcohol or excessively using alcohol when their frontal lobe isn't fully developed. It affects their drive. It affects their this, that, and the other thing. And I'm like, well, marijuana and alcohol would both do that.
No, that's it. They both do that.
So why are you okay with one and not the other?
Yeah, they are both addictive. If you look at the research, they're both equally a gateway drug, right? Like neither one is actually really considered a gateway drug. This idea of them being a gateway drug has been disproven. But if you're going to look at and say, well, people who use harder drugs use marijuana, yes, well, people who use harder drugs use alcohol too. So
Right.
why is one okay and the other isn't? You know, like I did not get this on page 16 on 196 and 197. She says, quote, my children know that drugs are unacceptable. And then she goes on, blah, blah, blah. They're completely forbidden by her and her husband. And I was like, isn't this completely against everything you've said in the book? Like, don't tell them no, don't forbid
Right.
things, don't draw these hard lines in the sand. And then when you do stick your head in the sand and be like, well, of course, my children listen to me. I said it's completely forbidden. Like, what is happening here? Like, what?
Well, and I can't, like, I can tell them don't do drugs at all, ever, totally bad. But if I tell them to only drink 3 drinks when they go out, it puts too much pressure on their shoulders and will extinguish their stars, right? And so I'm like, I'm so confused. So I think that's part of the reason that I didn't have a ton of notes, is I was like, she'd say like, this is not good, this is not good, this is not good. But in Germany, they do this, and in England, they do that, and in America, they do this. And I was like, so you're just justifying why it's okay, or it's not great, but everybody else is in the same not great boat as us. So I just won't worry about that. It was kind of how I read it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. And it's complicated, right? Like if we all come into it with our own personal issues and personal biases, right? And you know, I can sit here and I can say, you know, neither my husband nor I have ever used any sort of illegal recreational drug ever, right? For where we are and who, and for no good reason other than the fact that we chose not to, right? We're in our 40s and that was the decision we've made. And but you know, like even still, I can sit here and be like, you know, look, I'm not cool with it, but at the same time, I'm going to educate my kid on why you need to be careful with it, on what the realities are. And I'm going to hope that, well, I'm not going to draw this crazy line in the sand that they don't come to me if they do and something awful happens, right? You know, like the last thing you want to do is be like, I absolutely forbid it and you better not ever do it. And I'll like, I will, I, I I also did not drink in high school. I had plenty of opportunities. I chose not to. I didn't have my first drink outside of trying things my parents let me try with them, right? Until I was well into university, not my first year. I made through my first year of college. I think maybe by my second year, I had a drink or two. I was in high school. It was a senior party. I grew up in the boonies. The senior party was in a cow field. And everyone had tents and lots of alcohol and cars. And I talked to my mom and I said, you know, hey, I really want to go to this. And I think it was probably the first time that I went to any kind of party that she like knew for sure there was going to be alcohol at. I had been to a few other parties where there had been alcohol at. I just never told her because she just didn't need to worry about that. I have pretty strict parents. And someone at that party was drinking a lot and was diabetic and like started going into a diabetic shock and everyone was freaking drunk. Like,
Right.
you know, and so I and a couple of my friends who, you know, we got there a little late and then I was also at the DD and they felt a little weird because I was staying sober. And so they were on the more sober end, right? We're like dragging this guy into the car, driving him into town, like trying to find a place that's open to shove some sugar in his mouth because he's like, no, don't, not the hospital. You know, my mom will be so mad. And you're like, and we made such bad choices and thank God he's okay, you know, but like we made terrible choices because there was this line in the sand of like, this will be awful and you should not seek appropriate medical care because someone will be upset. Like, so bad. It's so bad.
I mean, when I worked in corporate America, I worked in pharmaceuticals. And so when I learned what a drug goes through to come to market and the amount of testing and the data that they have to submit and all of that kind of stuff, and I thought, I have ingested things that were stirred up in bathtubs, for fuck's sake. Like how, like for my kids to know, you have no idea what goes into the science of it. Like to take something that you have no idea what's in it, that you can't trust who made it. You can't trust what's in it, all of that kind of stuff. They need to know that kind of stuff and to understand the reality of that situation,
Yeah.
because it's not as safe as they might think it is, because everybody at the party is just running around going, oh, it's so much fun and we're having a great time. And the reality is you have no idea what that pill or that powder or that liquid, whatever, you have no idea what that thing is. And it
Mhm.
has not been tested in any way or regulated in any way. And all of that. At least now in California, you probably do have some regulation, at least on the purity, I would think, of marijuana, wouldn't you? I mean, is it
Yeah.
regulated in that sense to know that it's at least safe and it's not laced with anything or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that you're buying at a dispensary or something like that. But the thing is, teenagers can't get the stuff at the dispensary. So you still have plenty of stuff that's not,
That could potentially be super dangerous.
yeah,
Yeah.
that could be. And so, I mean, it's all complicated, right? And so I'm not trying to downplay the fact that figuring these things out and drawing these lines in your own family isn't complicated. It absolutely is. And of course, it's going to be overshadowed, or at least partially driven by the decisions you made as a teenager and the bad things you saw and the good things you saw, and all of that. I don't want to downplay that or understate that. I just was not super happy with the way that it was handled in this chapter.
Yeah.
And the examples go on. So on page 199, right, she says,
This is
quote,
fabulous. I highlighted this too.
in Danish high schools, colleges, and other educational institutions, alcohol is allowed at school parties, not in junior high. And she says that, right? She wants to make sure you understand alcohol is not allowed at junior high parties. Quote continues, if you are too drunk, the parents will be called and you will be sent home. But moderate drunkenness is accepted. This is how the culture has been for many years, although more and more places are starting to offer alcohol-free events and parties. I was like,
Revolutionary. Yeah, I highlighted that too. And I was like, all right. The whole not in junior high thing reminded me of a couple of chapters ago when she was talking about when they put their babies to sleep outside in the winter. And she was like, only a couple of kids got kidnapped. It was like, oh, here it's like, I mean, we don't give preschoolers alcohol. Come on, don't exaggerate,
Exactly. I mean,
yeah.
That said, I will say when we lived in Belgium, I will not forget we were randomly at a park out walking, right? I think I was actually with mom friends and we were out like walking the babies around the park or something. That idea, like get the babies out in the cold. And there were these kids that could not have been more than 14 or 15 years old. And they had their 6-packs there with them, standing in the gazebo, a big group of them drinking, and no one cared. And we were just like, my friends are from Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And we were like, that is not, I guess. Okay.
You're like, trying not to look too American right now, but I'm a little bit surprised by what's happening here.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. This next one is, okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So
I can't.
Starting on page 200, she's got some cute anecdotes about her being not drunk, right? She wants you to know that she wasn't drunk, maybe just tipsy. There's one where she washes her hair in a sink while she's at a party, and the sink was clogged up with vomit, and she didn't notice it until she woke up the next morning. And then she's got another story about how she was like publicly throwing a fit and like kind of out of control, to the point that her mom came to try to get her and bring her home, and she wouldn't come home with mom. So then mom goes and gets a neighbor to help try to get the daughter home. And the daughter's like so upset and so embarrassed that she runs home, locks her mom out of the house, and falls asleep right away. I'm going to guess that's actually passed out. And again, probably not just tipsy, probably, and she just wraps it all up with like, ha ha, itty bitty youth rebellion.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, again, there are bigger youth rebellions. I will give you that. I'm not positive I'd call it an itty bitty youth rebellion. And
vomit in the hair thing was too much. I couldn't. It was so gross.
Yeah, but I like that thing of like, I feel pretty confident that my definition of tipsy and her definition of tipsy are very, very different. I can't imagine a scenario where I would say I'm feeling a little tipsy and also I don't notice that I've shoved my head in a sink of vomit.
That's a bit much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I will say, okay, I at one time have a very distinct recollection of fishing my phone out of a toilet in a club. Okay, full disclosure, it wasn't a club, it was a strip club. So I went and I had already peed in the toilet, me myself. At least it was my pee.
Yeah.
And my Nokia, you know, the little Nokia, that one, okay, was in my back pocket. This was back in the days of Brazilian jeans where they were painted onto your body. And I pulled my pants off after having peed and my phone fell in the toilet.
Yep.
Exactly. And I was drunk enough that I just stuck my hand in there, fished my phone out, and put it back in my pocket. Like, it didn't seem at all odd. The next morning, I found it on the breakfast bar counter and was like, I remember pulling that out of a toilet and now it's on my breakfast bar. And I put it in a Ziploc and took it to the store. Was it Singular at the time? You remember Singular?
Yes. Yeah.
And it was like, this fell in a toilet. Can you get my numbers out of it? That's what I wanted. Can you get my number? The lady was like, no, I cannot get your numbers out of that thing, you know? But I was full on drunk. I mean, that's not a tipsy moment. Okay. That was,
yeah.
It was
but
completely
also,
drunk.
I have to say, I am certain that probably pretty much everyone of our generation accidentally, especially the women who wore the jeans with the tiny back pockets and you put your phone in your back pocket, like, we all probably lost a phone in a toilet at some point. And I don't think any of us actually flushed it. We were all like, oh, damn it. Oh, now I'm going to stick my hand in there and get it. We might have not put it on our breakfast bar, but we all lost a phone in the toilet and had to pull it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, no, I wasn't tipsy. I was freaking drunk. You know, I mean, that's not, her definition is a little askew. I fully admit that I was just drunk and in a strip club. So yeah, no, you know, that's how it goes.
Yeah. Apparently, if you remember any of it, you were only tipsy.
I was only tipsy. There you go. I never did get my phone numbers back. So it ended with a quote that I actually did. I kind of, okay, fine.
Okay.
Because we have been talking about, so this is on 204 and 205. We have been talking about the fact that teenagers sometimes do really stupid things, but they don't necessarily mean it or think it out ahead of time and think, wow, this is really stupid. I should plow forward with this plan. So I liked the fact that she said, rarely does your teen do anything deliberate to intimidate and hurt you, but they will challenge agreements you make when not including them. Agreements made jointly and unanimously make all the difference. It is all about involving them in decisions and finding a middle ground where both parties feel heard and met. You thereby avoid triggering some of your extinguished stars, which tend to lead to ultimatums. But instead, you polish your teenagers so that they shine a little more, which leads your teen to feel good and therefore want to cooperate with you. Win-win for everyone. She goes on to say, therefore, involve your teenager and agree on some terms that fit you both. Meet them with kindness and understanding if they unintentionally fail, so they feel that a good dialogue on how to do better next time is worth the chagrin. Keep in mind that their brains are still evolving, and even if they do their best, it might not be good enough in your eyes. Let them know that you trust them, understand their point of view, and that you love and respect and trust the two of you share. So I liked that part, not necessarily about turning a blind eye to underage drinking to the point that you got vomit in your hair, but as a general parenting principle, I liked that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's that thing, right? I mean, again, it's all complicated, but
Yes.
if at the end of the day, you're trying to remember that everyone is trying to do the best that they can and you're respecting your teen, right? It's not that bad. You're doing all right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So before we hit up chapter 10, we would just love to remind you that we have a Patreon and we would love for you to join us. Your monthly membership helps support us and this podcast. And I mean, who doesn't love getting at least a little bit of monetary support for all their time, effort, and hard work? But also, we're working really hard to build a virtual community of progressive, like-minded secular homeschoolers. With Patreon, you'll have access to monthly themed unit studies and the option of monthly live happy hour community building events and monthly Q&A sessions to discuss, brainstorm, commiserate, or whatever else you might need with both Meagan and I. Wherever we are in the world, we'll be dialing in and having those live opportunities twice a month. So to do that, you do have to join our Patreon. You can find the details on our Instagram page, as well as on our spiffy new Homeschool Moms Unfiltered website. And yeah, we hope to meet you live online soon.
I know. Yeah. At the time we're recording this, our next live meeting will be a mom's night out. Come, make some friends, and have fun.
Yeah. And I gotta say, you said mom's night out, but really more of like a happy hour vibe, right? If you got a dad or a grandma or, you know, whoever's participating and is just like, oh, I just need some cool people to talk to because I cannot do another, you know, park play date with the other homeschool parents that are talking about which Bible studies they're studying this week. We're here. We
don't
gotcha.
do that. Yeah.
All right, then. So we're almost there. Chapter 10. It's a pretty quick one called Chapter 10, Empathy. Rejection is not our greatest fear. Being invisible is. And when I first read it, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, that's a different take. I think a lot of teenagers really fear rejection. But I guess if I think about it, I could see like this idea of being invisible, of like no one noticing you, like actually being a bigger fear than rejection. And then I read and realized that it's not about the teenagers at all. It's actually about the parents. So,
yeah, about kind of this new chapter of parenting and development with your kids.
Yeah. So I will say the second page on page 210, there's a pull-out box that says, empathy facilitates our connection to others. It develops in infancy through the relationship with our attachment figure. The more open you are to your own feelings, the more proficient you become at reading emotions. And I thought that was a good, again, you know, you should probably know that, but one of those things, like it's good to read it. It's good to be reminded, this idea of building it and growing it and flexing that muscle so that you can use it better as you get older.
The thing that made me pause when I read that section is the part where it says it develops in infancy through the relationship with our attachment figure. So my youngest is an empath, and there's being empathetic towards other people. And then as an empath, and I'm sure there's a spectrum of being an empath and how that feels, I have to be very careful, we all do, with anything around him. If I look stressed, if I sigh too many times, if I'm sitting at my desk and I sigh multiple times, I will get like a very concerned, are you okay? Is everything all right? He picks up on all of that energy and absorbs it, and it's exhausting for him. He has a math teacher on Outschool who he loves, who he's been with he's with him about 6 hours a week. And his math teacher at one point had the flu or COVID or something. And one day he says, I really hope he feels better soon. And I thought, oh, yes, of course. Me too. That's terrible that he's not well. And he goes on to say his energy is completely different when he's sick. And he wasn't as demonstrative with the kids. He wasn't as warm with the kids. And he was still doing an amazing job. But it just goes without saying that when you feel like crap, you're not going to be. And that shift in energy threw my kid for a loop. And so I found it really interesting that she says that it develops in infancy through our relationship with our attachment figure, because that's freaking me. Right. And so I was like, how did it develop? I don't doubt her science. She's a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever. But how did it develop differently with him than it did with my other kids who have very societal, typical levels of empathy for other human beings? And then I have one who feels on such a level that it's almost detrimental to his own mental health sometimes. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I'm like, that's a rabbit hole I'm going to have to explore another day. But I thought that was a pretty interesting situation.
I would bet, I don't know, this is not super well informed, but I would bet that that's just one of those differently wired things, right? It's a neurodivergence. The an empath
Yeah.
is a neurodivergence thing that is not so much societal, but it more has to do or is more correlated with that, like the early attachment parenting with infants. And you see, there are studies that are, some better than others, but that look at like attachment with children who have been in orphanages
Mm-hmm.
or children who have been in the foster care system, and that lack of consistent attachment in infancy can really hamper some of these emotional skills like empathy and things like that. I would guess that's probably more where that's coming in.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was sitting there going, well, how did I end up with one who's so far? Because I've always thought of it as a wiring. I've not thought of it as a learned behavior or a developed behavior, but more so the way he's built.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
found
and
that pretty
I would
interesting.
guess that extreme side of it is a wiring thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I thought that was pretty good.
yeah.
211, she's got, to your point, which you kind of brought up already, kind of this fear of her teens slipping out of her hands and having it dominate her thoughts. And so her having to kind of reshift her thoughts on what parenting is. And I thought, and there's another quote that I'll just jump to because it's on that same thing, but it's on 220, where she says, it's not a different game, but a deck of cards reshuffled and dealt out again. And I felt like that is true. I have 3 teenagers, but I think that's also true just throughout parenting. There's going to be all of these different evolutions in your parenting journey where it feels like the deck of cards has been reshuffled and you have to find your footing and find your ground again. It does happen with teenagers, but I think it happens throughout. I think it'll happen when they get married. I think it'll happen when they become parents themselves, and all of these different phases. It'll feel like the rules of the game have changed and you haven't been given a rule book, and then you have to figure out what they are again. I
Yeah.
think that's just parenting.
Yeah. I think so. And so, I mean, I think I generally had a little bit more of a struggle with this chapter because we're not anywhere close to teenage, like the true teenage years and the independence and the moving out. And generally my biggest takeaway was just this idea of like, you have to remember that they're becoming adults and you're no longer the most important person, and finding that way to like be there and be that balance and be like a port in a storm, but also know that they need to go out and find their own people in their own life, and being able to do that. And it's hard, and I think we can probably all look at our own childhoods and the relationships we had with our parents and say, well, this worked well for me and this didn't work well for me. And so I'm going to try to change this, or I'm going to try to do this differently, but I'm going to try to keep this, and implement that myself in my own home or whatever. But yeah, generally, I was like, oh, I mean, it all makes sense. And hopefully I remember it in 10 years, like, all right. So on page 214, she's got a section called Hormone Crash. And I'm just like, again, it's come up many times. I am disabled. I have a lot of health problems. And so because of that, I am very aware of even tiny things and shifts and changes in my body, because I keep very close tabs on things, right? Like if I don't keep very close tabs on things, it could be quite bad. And so I realize that I'm more aware than a lot of people.
I am not disabled. I am a hypochondriac with anxiety. So I also notice very minute shifts in my body. And I'm forbidden from using the internet for those things. But I totally understand what you're saying for different reasons.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So first, she didn't notice perimenopause or menopause until she had gone more than an entire year without a period. I'm like, how freaking oblivious is she? Like, I can't even, like, I knew perimenopause was happening before I'd even missed a period. I'm like, whoa, things are like, there's changes, there's shifts, like, and now I'm in that like stage where, like, oh, 1 month it just doesn't show up, and then, things are normal and there's like a random hot flash maybe, or, some things like and the thing is I know for some people perimenopause can go on for like 10 years, but there's no one that it's less than a year. I mean, you like to be in menopause, the definition of menopause is that you've gone an entire year without your period. So like it has to be at least a year plus 1 month. Like
Right.
I don't even, I just like, how, I don't, how, I don't, I,
It's interesting, right? Yeah. It reminds me, and I know this is from my childhood when we weren't as culturally aware in many cases as we are today, right? But I was a huge Little House on the Prairie TV watcher when I was younger. And so I know now, looking at it through an adult lens, that it's problematic in many ways, etc. But as a child, it was about Nellie Olson being a bitch and Laura being amazing, and that was pretty much it. But I specifically remember there was an episode where one of the grown children, it would have been Laura or Mary, comes home and tells Ma and Pa Ingalls that she's pregnant, and Mrs. Ingalls was like, "I'm pregnant too, isn't that amazing?" And then goes to the doctor to confirm pregnancy at some point and realizes that she's in menopause and she's not actually pregnant. And I'm like, I feel like Laura Ingalls' mom was on the freaking prairie and figured it out faster than this woman who's a medically trained doctor. Like, what the fuck?
yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. Okay. That said, this section was actually, I thought she made a good point because she is the bigger point once you get past her obliviousness is that a lot of moms are dealing with these huge hormone shifts themselves, right? You're going, the process of perimenopause into menopause and then after is, I mean, huge, right? The hormones are changing massive amounts. And they're also dealing with the huge hormones of puberty as a parent raising a child going through puberty and how they kind of just crash, right? And it's just like you have to be aware of the fact that you're parenting in very rocky seas on both sides, right? This is not just one person's storm, it's two storms and they're not storming together. And so yeah, I was like, that's, I mean, it's I just feel like it's true for so many at different ages and points, right? So I was like, yeah, that's, I mean, I'm there, so I guess that that was like, oh yes,
Top
check.
of mind. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. Yeah. Okay, I just have a funny moment on 216 because she's talking about parenting during menopause, and she says that when she is having these hormonal moments, etc., and she's talking about being cranky with her kids, like, you better clean up now or else you won't be able to go to a party tonight. I have a busy day and I can't stand to see you lying in bed lazily. Get a part-time job, otherwise you will no longer get any pocket money, which we've been told throughout this entire book that is not how she parents, right? And then she says, exactly. So then she says, ultimatums creep out of you. And I thought, but she said she never. If you recall last week, I never. And so I thought, never until menopause, apparently, because here you are.
And I'm like, never until you're in my stage now. So I feel a bit better about the fact that every once in a while, ridiculous things come out of my mouth. And I'm like, oh man, that was bad.
Must go apologize to kid. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So I just thought that was pretty funny because I literally wrote in the margins, but you said you never. So apparently she does.
Well, yes.
Oh, all right. So epilogue, subtle sense. That's quite the title there. Let's see. I just made a note here talking about being aware of our unconscious patterns.
Yeah.
And I think that's just true for people in general, is being aware of your quirks, your habits, your pet peeves, your whatever, just having self-awareness, because it affects so many things that you do.
Yeah. So I had flagged that same thing, and I think it's a great quote. So I'm going to read it out. So she says, think about how many of us could live freely and unleash our potential if we did not carry heavy baggage from previous generations on our shoulders. So much pain and hatred would not exist, as it would have dissolved in the places from where they arose. Barricades usually turn out to be all the times we have not felt recognized and loved for who we are, which constitutes an unresolved remembrance of the past in certain areas that we will project out on the world to the ones nearest to us, our kids included. If we are not aware of these unconscious patterns, it will profoundly influence our children's well-being. And it's a really wordy way of just saying, you know, yeah, unconscious patterns, be aware of them. And, that baggage, like, I think we've talked about it here. I talk about it all the time in my personal life with friends and in my own marriage, that idea of like, we're all going to mess up, right? We're all going to do something to mess up our kids. Like, I feel like a therapy fund is just as important as a college fund in our home, not because I'm purposely trying to mess anything up or because I know what I'm messing up. I'm just realistic about the fact that I'm messing up my kid in one way or another. Hopefully, it's not the same mistakes that my parents made, just like my parents tried to make sure that they didn't do what their parents did, right? Like, every generation tries to improve on the previous generation, and that's a great thing. But being aware of the fact that just because you did improve on the previous generation and that you're actively paying attention and trying not to, you can't pretend like, well, I'm a perfect parent and I made no mistakes as well,
Yeah.
But I do think that happens now, right? There's
Yes.
so much awareness about this idea of, generational trauma. There's that great meme. We should find it and put it on our channel for anyone who wants to see it. But it shows like the kind of generational trauma. And then I think it's maybe a mom who's using like a shield to try to cover and protect her kid from the generational trauma raining down over generations. And like, it's true. And we do have a lot more awareness. At the same time, we have to be aware of the fact that no matter how hard we try to be better, we're still not perfect. No, there is no such thing as perfect when it comes to human beings.
Because I think a lot of times when we are engaged in conversations with people through our community or other communities, and I'm sure it's true personally for myself to some extent also, that when there's an issue, it's easier or more instinctual to look externally before looking internally to seeing what the root of that issue might be. And the reality is there's probably an intrinsic reason for it and an external reason. So it's probably a perfect storm of those things. But if you're only looking externally ever at what the kid is doing or what your partner is doing, and you're missing the part about how am I contributing to this or how am I impacting this, then it's going to be pretty hard to remedy anything and actually make some forward progress.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I felt like that was the epilogue talked about a lot of this kind of stuff, right? It was like kind of her chance to wrap up this idea of your own personal baggage and how much it impacts your parenting. So the next thing I had for me was on page 128. She's got a paragraph that says, "Still, unfortunately, no one prepares us for the unconscious expectations of parenthood. And without us being aware of these processes, we continue to transfer old, outdated patterns and personal wounds from previous generations onto our children without wanting to do so. We simply teach them that they can only be completely loved if they do as we wish for them to do and carry our old narratives and wounds together with us." And you'll be shocked to know that I'm of two minds with this paragraph. I feel like I say that a lot with this book. But so it's one of those things. Again, I agree with that basic idea of like, you have to be aware and there are things that you will miss, right? But being aware is the first step. And then the second step is trying to like actively change that and prevent it. And also realizing that there will be things you don't realize and that you are going to mess your kids up with certain things, not on purpose. Hopefully, I would say the vast majority of parents aren't trying to mess their kids up on purpose. And hopefully no one listening to our podcast is like, "Oh, let me see. I'm a liberal, progressive, open-minded homeschooler, but how can I mess my child up?" But I don't, I think that even when you are accidentally doing these things or you're unconsciously doing these things, I think there are a lot of us who aren't going all in on this idea that we're teaching our kids that they can only be completely loved if they do as we wish. Like, I don't know. I just felt like that went like a little too far in the idea of like, well, you're unconsciously doing this and your kids are learning that there's no way you'll completely and unconditionally love them.
Yeah. But her whole writing style or her whole approach to parenting throughout this has been very black and white, very extreme, very all in or all out. So it's not terribly surprising, probably, that that's her thought process
I
there.
suppose.
Whereas we've kind of leaned into the gray a little bit more with some of the topics where we're like, I see what you're saying, but maybe partially or something along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
I was just talking with the kiddo this past week about the fact that, like, yes, we like to say that life is black and white, but the reality is, white is 0% and black is 100%. And everything in between is gray, whether that's, 1% white and 99% black, or 99% white and 1% black. Like, that's a shade of gray. And, you've got way, way more options of gray than you do black and white. And he was like, oh, I don't like thinking about that. That's like,
I'm going to retreat to my 100% and 0% now. Thank you very much. Oh my goodness. Well, I love that we both ended this book with the same quote, which is on 229. And so she says, life with toddlers was hard and stressful, but also wonderful, meaningful, and fun, while life with teenagers is a mix of self-reflection, healing of wounds, pride, and gratitude. And I have said in the last year, maybe year and a half, that I love my teenagers. I love having teenagers. I don't think I'd want to go back to the toddler days for anything. One of my sister-in-laws has 3 small children, small-ish. The oldest one's like first grade, down to a newborn. And she'll post things sometimes like, oh, my babies are growing up and this and that. And I'm like, oh no, it gets better. It totally gets better. I love having teens. I love how responsible they are. I love how dynamic they are. I love how interesting they are. I love all of it. But parenting teenagers has kicked my ass in a way that parenting 3 kids under 4 never did. It is just, the problems are bigger, the emotions are bigger, the questions are bigger, the personalities are bigger, oh fuck. I mean, this time last year, all 3 of my kids were just kind of synced up, kind of like the way they talk about like menstrual cycles syncing up with the moon and people who menstruate who live in the same household or in the same community, and they kind of sync up. Somehow all 3 of my kids synced up in teenager meltdown mode last year, this October of last year. And I cried every single day. I mean, it was just, because you feel like when they're struggling, you're feeling like, what did I do wrong? Or how did I fail them? Or should I have seen this coming? Or could I have prevented this? Or whatever the case might be. And thankfully we got everybody had a different issue too, which of course is like, ping, 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 you're bouncing all over the place, but you're sitting there thinking, holy shit, I've completely failed at this. I've completely screwed this up. And thankfully it didn't go on forever. It was short-lived. We got everybody sorted out. Everybody started feeling good again. But man, 3, when my kids were 1, 3, and 4, and they had a rough week, you go to the park and you take them outside and they run around and then they come home and they eat and they crash. It's a really quick, easy fix. But when they're dealing with stress and emotion and attraction and future forecasting for their lives and uncertainty around that and stuff, that's a lot. You can't just take them to the park. I mean, you can, but it's not gonna, we do still go to the park almost every day and go for a nice walk, but it's not going to fix that stuff. And so yeah, parenting teens has kicked my ass in a way that has been really tiring, and I love it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I don't want to go backwards. I never want to change another diaper again. I don't want to hold a gassy baby ever again. But shit, it's a lot, right? It's a lot. So, Yeah. So overall, worth reading. I mean, I'll read pretty much anything. So I'm like, worth reading. It's almost always pretty much worth reading for me. Even if I just take a handful of things out of it, I'm like, good book. I liked it. I wouldn't say it was like revolutionary to my parenting, but it was good. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I would read it on my own, but I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that at this point, a lot of what was in here was not necessarily new to me. So, like, random backstory, right? On Tuesdays, my kiddo takes parkour, and his parkour teacher has just had their first child. And we were randomly talking, and his parkour teacher really admires our homeschooling journey and thinks that my kiddo is really great, and often talks about what a great kiddo he is, and because it's homeschooling, and has talked a lot about how they plan to homeschool and the reasons for it and that kind of stuff. And so we have a lot of similarities there. And it's during that parkour class that I usually do my reading for book club. And so I was reading this book, and the teacher came up after the class and was like, "Oh, how was reading this week? Is the book any good?" Because I usually say like, "Oh, you should read this one," or I wouldn't do that, that kind of, we have those kind of talks. And I was just like, like, I'm just struggling to find it super valuable, like she's talking about inclusivity right now, and talking, and kind of diving into the importance of accepting whatever, and like just these kind of things. And I'm kind of like, and it was like, well, yeah, but those things are so important, and so many parents don't know. And I'm like, from a guy who's got a 1-month-old, it's true, like, right, he's new on this path of thinking about these things and how this applies to a child and how you implement it to a child. And we did a lot of that. And I guess I just felt like, even though it's aimed at teens, the only thing I really got that was specifically teens was let them drink a lot.
The drinking,
And
yeah.
like, and that doesn't align with where I'm at for a wide variety of reasons that we won't go into on the show. So yeah. But again, one of those books, like, depending on where you're at in the journey and what you know and how much you need to think about, I could see it being useful for people.
Yeah. I mean, even in a book that I really don't like, which I'm not saying I didn't like this one, I can usually pull some redeeming factors out of it. And so I'm like, yeah, I did that here. So I'm satisfied. I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm a happy camper. Yeah, I like it. All right. So before we wrap up for today, so a reminder, Blake Bowles, Better Than College. That's what we're starting next week. Super excited about that. Wherever you are right now, if you're watching this clip on social media, if you're listening on iTunes, whatever, give us a like, give us a follow, give us a review, whatever. I mean, we went through this whole thing where we were trying to add our link to TikTok, and we had to send them LLC paperwork and all this kind of stuff. And we did it. And we were like, yes, the paperwork got accepted. Super exciting. Try to add the link to TikTok. Still can't add the link to TikTok. I'm like, why can't we do this? We sent you the paperwork that you told us you needed. Oh, we need that paperwork, and you have to have 1,000 followers. And I was like, right. So yeah. It's not because we're attention seeking and we have no self-esteem. It opens doors. If you can like and follow us somewhere, it allows us to be able to, do certain things. There's a book that's on our to be read list, and I was thinking about it during our last episode, Amanda, when we were talking about vision boarding, and you were talking about kind of having a huge variety of interests and careers and things like that. And it reminded me of that book, How to Be Everything by Emily Wapnick. And they are kind of one of my dream podcast guests at some point in the future, but they're busy, right? Yeah. I've been on the website and I've seen they have an official form to request speaking and stuff like that. So anybody who has that is getting enough of them that you have to rise to the top. So we have to kind of be able to say, like, hey, we have a whole bunch of followers, come hang out with us. So that's really the only reason why. It's not because we need that level of validation. We just try to open up some more doors to be able to build our community and invite new people in and broaden the conversation. So anywhere you are, if you can hit like, share, follow, whatever, rate us 5 stars, give us whatever, because it's different no matter where you're consuming this content. But we would be so grateful. So thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. We do. We really appreciate it. And as awesome as it is to be consistently on Apple Podcasts, top 200, we'd love to make it consistently on the top 100 or
Woohoo.
something like that. That'd be fun. We've been there. We've made it a few times, but to consistently be there would be fun.
Oh my gosh.
I never thought, right? Like, I mean, first off, I never thought we would get there at this. I never thought we'd get there. Full stop. I'll put that out there. And I definitely never thought we would get there at this point. So we do really appreciate the support, and we would love for you to help us go even further. Yeah.
I love it. When you were setting up your card table in the spare bathroom, it never occurred to you that we'd be in the top 100 on Apple Podcasts.
Never. Truly. I thought that I'd take over the bathroom for like 2 months before we'd be like, this is terrible. Never mind. Forget it.
Now you're like, long term, what if my kid needs to use this bathroom in the future? We might need our second bathroom.
Yep. No lies. No lies detected.
Well, thank you. We are so happy that you tune in and listen and share your thoughts and feedback and all that. It really does. It makes our day because we enjoy doing the podcast. And so the fact that people listen to it makes it fulfilling to show up and do it. So it's kind of it's a match made in heaven. So we hope you have an awesome rest of your day and a great week. And we will catch you next week for more Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. And Amanda, you want to say it in the meantime?
In the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Have an awesome day.
Have a good one.